Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
This is brilliant.
Yeah.
This is a unique situation. We are podcasters together talking about podcasts and security and
In a room with podcast and studio, which is as well. So like talking the meta on top of meta.
yes, and hopefully security outside as
Yeah.
well as a whole.
That's right.
But I wanted to ask, how did Cloud Security Podcast come about? What's the story?
I think you should start with the story first.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I'll start with the story. I think we've been always trying to educate people about different things. So Ashish and I were running DevSecOps Melbourne for a long time, 2-3 years before the pandemic. And we always just wanted to share knowledge with the community, share what we know, help people get better at what they're doing. When pandemic hit, I think a lot of people, and that's when cloud security was becoming quite a thing. Ashish has been working in cloud security for quite a while. And he would get a lot of messages in regards to, I want to know this, I want to know that. And, he was very generous with his time. He would spend time with people, talk about these things. But it wasn't scalable. How do you, make time for everyone? And that's when we thought, when he thought he'll start a podcast, just with a simple conversation. I think back in 2019, our setup was really minimal. Just a laptop, I think an iPhone camera in our spare room with like book stacks up. So, nothing too fancy. And that's how it all got started. So 3 years ago. And then just, every week consistency, just kept doing one after the other. And as we sort of got better, we started investing in equipment and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of like very humble beginnings for sure.
That's a really nice version, because essentially one of the reasons why the podcast also started, because we are married and we've been married for a long time, and she got me talking to my dog. Basically, so I obviously, for people who are listening, maybe not be able to tell, but I'd love to talk. Clearly, can talk quite a bit for hours. But when the pandemic hits and Melbourne kind of went into a complete lockdown, and we had rules where you could not step out or do anything. And I used to do this thing where every morning I'll just go out for coffee, meet people, and yap for a few hours or whatever. And that completely stopped. So I was trying to channel this, and clearly she found me talking to our dog, Simba, who's kind of on the website as well. And yeah, she's basically needed to channel this somewhere. Cannot be just like talking to a dog and talking about cloud security to a dog. Doesn't really work. And yeah, so I started the podcasting. A few people inspired us to do podcasting. We definitely found that was a medium that was definitely working quite well. And I would also say, I don't think we ever thought it was going to be, we've been video people for a long time. We've been doing videos in the men's fashion space, food, travel, before all this.
Nice.
Yeah, so we've always been video people. So podcasting was almost like a new beast we had to tackle. So it was interesting during the pandemic. Like, oh yeah, there's something different, and it kind of worked out. Yeah, I think I'm really grateful for the kind of support the community has given as well. So I just want to definitely call that out. That whatever we have achieved so far would not have been possible if people didn't get behind it. So yeah, super appreciative of what we have so far.
And you've kept your podcast very practical and actionable.
Yeah. I think we would like to think so. And most of the feedback we get from people who reach out, they all connect with the episodes. Like, I mean, different people connect with different episodes. Some people connect with a lot more episodes than the others. Like, we did one recently around the healthcare space, and people who were in the healthcare space came out like, oh, I really loved it. This is exactly what I go through. And your people find, at least I'm grateful that they're able to find something they connect with every episode. That has been really beneficial. I think maybe that's where the growth for the podcast comes in from as well.
Yeah, is there something that you look for, particularly when it comes to a guest? Because I was looking through all of the episodes, and there's so much content there now. I mean, you obviously meet a lot of people in the industry, and you have a lot of conversations. When you're speaking to someone, what makes you think that they're a guest?
Ooh, So she's a producer. She should talk about more about this.
I think we definitely do a lot of research into everyone that we get on the podcast. So just, speaking gigs they may have done, or sometimes it's just a matter of, we bump into someone and they speak to us and we're like, oh, actually your perspective is amazing. We'd love for you to come on the show. We really look for guests who add, and we've been very grateful. We've had some amazing guests on the thing. We really look for people who will add value to our audience, people who are listening, they'll walk away from it going, wow, I've learned something. That's the whole point of it. And yeah, just someone, and I don't think there's one perfect guest because everyone brings something very different. Some people are very technical. There'd be others who are just great storytellers. Some of our guests have been really good at like breaking things down into something very simple. So it's just making sure that, we've got that spectrum. The community, again, has been really good. So a lot of our guests are actually recommendations from people from the community saying, maybe you should get this person on, or, have you considered this person? And we're always looking for people to come on the podcast. It's not about someone being experienced. We just want to hear everyone's viewpoints. So we've had people who probably have never been on a podcast before. We're happy to have them, or people who are veterans as well in the space.
I think it's worthwhile calling it the flip side as well, because we do it as a live stream. There's a lot of people who say no as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, so because unlike what people might hear and go, oh, it's a podcast, so it's an audio only.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about it, they're like, oh, there's a video. Oh, it's a live stream. And it's almost like you're upping the note. Yeah, basically like, holy, wow, okay, this is not what I expected. You said podcast. I'm like, yeah, well, technically it's like a vodcast, but I've kind of started with the name podcast, so I can't change it anymore.
Live. But I think people are getting more open to it. I think we used to get more people shying away from it, but maybe I think through the pandemic, because everyone's now on a Zoom call, so I think people are, but like I'm definitely more comfortable in front of a camera, so I think that's definitely shifted. Live stream, I think that's another level of barrier because people often are like, oh, am I going to get asked something really random? Though, we're pretty good at sort of, making sure no one's asking you about your security posture and all of those things. But it's still a scary one because, cybersecurity can be so sensitive for a lot of people.
I think some of the interesting guests have been where there's a PR person in the background or on the live stream with us, ready to cut the feed if there's a question asked, which is basic, somehow putting the company in a bad light.
Yeah. So some guests do come with their entourage.
Yeah, they just sit in the background with
like,
me.
Oh, this is kind of cool, but kind of scary as well.
Yeah, we have to go through questions beforehand. There's definitely, over the past 3 and a bit years that we've been running the podcast, we definitely have seen a lot more of good things, bad things, ugly things as well sometimes. But it's definitely something that I feel, coming back to the guest to answer your question, there are still people who feel they are not good enough guests as well. And sometimes it's about, to what Shilpi said, we'll have a conversation, we feel, oh my God, your perspective is amazing. We'd love to kind of showcase it. Like, don't really think my perspective is that interesting. And you kind of have to convince them to get an understanding.
Or people feel they're sometimes not knowledgeable enough. And but you know so much. So, that can be sometimes.
I honestly think they're just nice people. That's why they think, I don't think I know enough. But on the flip side, when we get to talk to so many people and you're going to go, oh, that's a really interesting perspective. But the person doesn't believe in themselves and you're doing this like self-confidence building. Plus then you say live stream, like, oh, great. Like, it's not even audio. Like, oh, yeah. So it is a bit of a tricky process to answer your question in a, I guess, complex way. But primarily, if I were to put them in buckets, it's either recommendation from people or some of the conversations we would have with different people and they have an interesting perspective. But what you would find is about 90% of the guests that come in are practitioners.
Okay.
That probably is what connects the most with people. We have had people who have been developer advocates or are doing advocacy work in the space, and they definitely come solve a problem, and that's definitely been beneficial. It's funny, some of the, it's a podcast, so it's sponsored episodes as well.
Yeah.
And some of those guests have been really interesting, that the community is open to the idea that, yes, I know it's a sponsored thing, but I would not do a sales pitch. I'm just literally just going to explain the problem.
Interesting.
But to the point that someone literally asked one of those guests, what company do you work for? It was like hilarious to see that on a live question coming in, because they're like, oh, you explained it so well, but I want to know where you are, what do you work for? Because you can't really see in the live stream as to where they are. But apart from, hey, I'm so-and-so, and they've kind of not said the company name or anything. And they just get curious enough, like, oh my God, I want to know where this was.
That's indicative of someone who really understands the problem they're solving. And we're very picky. We always say, look, we don't want any sales pitches. And if we smell it from a mile away, we're like, no, that's not what the podcast
Then we
is
cut
about.
the feed.
Then we
Then you're just.
Yeah, basically unplug, walk away.
It's interesting that you talk about what you've taken away from those sort of conversations and the sort of surprising conversations that you've had. Because obviously, when you're working with technology, everything is a technology problem.
Yeah,
And then when you sort of become a leader, not everything is a technology problem.
Mhm.
And then when you become a leader, very few things are technology problems, but they're all kind of related to technology. I don't know whether or not that kind of...
It is, and I think we definitely try and cater for all sides of it, but there's certain things like you can't cater for politics, for lack of a better word. It's like, we can tell you the best tool for solving a technology problem, but if Ashish, just for lack of a better word, is a dick, he's just going to say, well, great idea, but I don't like it, so I'm just going to move on. And so no technology can fix Ashish, unless Ashish moves, retires, or hopefully just moves on to a different field, like podcasting full time. So maybe I definitely find that's definitely a challenge. So yeah.
And I think we do have like a special series that we run, which is the CISO perspective. And that's a question we often ask. And I think that's been quite topical as well. Like, does a CISO need to be technical or not? And I think what we've taken away from a lot of conversations is really depends on the organization, what your board expects from you. Some organizations actually do need a CISO that's quite technical, whereas some organizations probably need someone who's more business minded. Often they say you do kind of need a bit of both, but it's a hard one to answer, and it really depends on the organization.
It's a tricky balance. I wanted to ask, I mean, when you were talking about spelling those sales pitches from a mile off, do you have the same sort of thing with security fads when people bring up?
Yeah,
when
I definitely. I think we definitely do that enough, because I think if you look at, you can create content in a certain sentiment in general. And I definitely don't believe that the whole security FUD, as they call it, it definitely doesn't create a positive sentiment. And primarily, Shilpi and I positive people, love to laugh around, have a good giggle here and there, enjoy life in general, and be positive. So we've definitely strayed away from it. So anytime I would have a conversation where it's like, it gives me even a little bit of hint, or even Shilpi feels that there's a bit of hint for, this is definitely not positive. Like, no, sometimes you just look at it and go, I'm not going to be happy with that content, so what's the point?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you'll find some other podcasts who you can pay money and they'll just, put you up there. And funny enough, we reject a lot of sponsored episodes as well for the same reason, because they just want, I want the list of people who are going to come in. I also want this like 100 demands. Plus, I want to do a sales demo in the middle of it. Like, sure, it's like, pay me $1 billion and I will still not do it. Yeah. But sure.
But also the right fit. I think what we find quite often, because we'd get queries from people, and I often look at it and go, okay, how are we related? Because we're cloud security, we're very specific, we're not cyber security, and often people just look at, you're a popular podcast, I want to advertise, and we've had to actually say no to a lot of people going, look, our audience isn't the right audience for you. We are not, we specifically do cloud security. Your product is not a cloud security product. So I think we probably have the luxury to do that because we do have like day jobs as well. So for us, it is a labor of love. But yeah, that's been quite important, that we want to make sure that even if we are having ads, it's ads that are relevant to our audience. Like, you don't want to hear about something that you're not in the space of at all.
Like, if you heard about a carpentry ad in the middle of a cybersecurity podcast, you're like,
I mean, I'm gone.
That's basically it's like, what the hell?
Bounce.
Yeah. Even if you were doing some woodwork right at the moment, you're like, I'm not great. I mean, you may be one of the 10,000 people that we have listening at the given point in time, but still, is it really worth the money?
It's not the most direct Venn diagram. No, not at all.
I mean, we're all up for diversity, but like,
but that just kind of takes it a bit to the next level.
But when it came to something like, I watched a really interesting video on, I think that you did on Zero Trust.
Oh, yeah.
That really, I'd only ever heard that term used in a very flippant way. So it was really interesting to kind of get to the sort of substance of something that became really popular. Are you finding...
Well, I think you should talk about the original series that we started as well.
Yeah, so I think we've almost gone for a hunt. And I think when you said buzzwords, we hear the buzzwords and we are almost on a mission to validate those buzzwords. Like,
nice.
Are they buzzwords? Like Zero Trust, very much, you've been hearing about it, especially for the last 2-3 years. It's everywhere. And I mean, yeah, we all know what zero trust means, but do we really know what it means? And, you know, when we kind of did a version of that when we went to the conferences earlier this year in San Francisco, and actually talking to people and saying, what does it actually mean for you? Are you implementing it? Is it even realistic? Something like zero trust, it's, I think, very idealistic.
Yeah.
Can you ever really, truly have zero trust in an organization that has, you know, 70 years, 80 years of data? We'd like to aim towards it, but whether we're going to get to there, I think that's a hard one. So I think same thing with like supply chain is another series that we've done. And that's, again, got a lot of noise around it. And there's a lot of buzzwords and because of all the, you know, breaches that have happened. But it's such a big piece of the puzzle. And where should organizations really focus? Like supply chain is like endless and you can't focus on all the bits. So we're really on a mission to sort of, you know, like ask people and educate people in terms of like what's realistic. Yeah, it's good to sort of say, oh, you know, we want to aim for zero trust, but what does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
I think just to add to that as well, one of the reasons we wanted to go down this path was to what Shilpi mentioned, I guess, distill the topic for what it is and for anyone to be able to pick it up, but also showcase, like we're big fans of Vox Media, VOX.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they cover content really well, and some of their reporters have branched out into becoming more YouTubers and stuff as well. And it's almost like that kind of way of, I guess that's what inspired the whole Cloud Security Podcast original series, where it's not your regular interview podcast, but essentially it's content where we pick a topic like zero trust and try and distill it, kind of almost give it a journalistic spin.
Yes, it reminds me almost of Vox Explained.
Yeah.
Like it's got that sort of...
That's pretty much it. And that's kind of was the inspiration for it, where how do we kind of give the information in a way that it's understandable by anyone, but at the same time is the truth from the industry. This is the reality as of at this point in time. This is where it stands. Your digital supply chain, your zero trust, and anything else that comes with it. And we were fortunate enough that when we went to conferences, people spoke to us as well, and we got to hear all these different perspectives, which you could bring onto the podcast. That kind of made it, we could be video journalists for cybersecurity. And it was, in a way, a good feeling, to the point that the positive response we got from it has definitely made us go, we should do more like this. This is definitely something we can do more often.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be doing lots more originals and other things.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't. Amazon doesn't. Or is it Amazon or Netflix? They have an original thing as well. That's where the name came in from.
Well, I mean, you can do like a I'm sure.
Yeah, it's like if it's called Cloud Security Podcast Original, not Netflix Original.
Exactly.
So it's totally still ours.
Yeah, see you in court, Netflix.
Yeah.
Well, having all of these conversations and like increasing your awareness, do you find that having all of these discussions, I'm sure that you hear about a lot of horror stories that are anonymized, that you can't mention with a microphone in front of you.
Yeah.
As professionals work like active in the security space, what threats keep you up at night? What kind of scares you? What have you heard about that you've been a bit...
Ooh, this is the most recent one that we were talking to Miko Hipman. Yeah. That was the most interesting. So one of the conversations we had was with this individual who's been part of the cybersecurity space for 32 years. When we interviewed him, he was carrying a floppy drive, I believe, which still had a malware from that year. Like this big, for people who can see the video, that big. And he spoke about something which was really interesting. He said something along the lines of, as we've kind of gone into the whole crypto world, the hacker space and the bad hacker space, not the good hacker space, but say your attackers, for lack of a better word, they have become nation state level. They know about how we talk about, oh, look at this unicorn company, look at that unicorn company. Technically, a lot of these hacker community, which have a negative outlook towards, I guess, companies and how to get money, they have been unicorns as well in their own right through crypto. But we never talk about them, but they're being really well funded. I think, in fact, there was one example that he said, which I don't know how many people, maybe a lot of people may be affected by it without even realizing it, that so one particular community was putting out fake jobs, and they would reach out to someone, hey, on LinkedIn, hey, Jess, you look like a really great person for this job. Would you be interested? What do you get currently at the moment? Oh, so I get about £10,000. Oh, sweet. Okay, so how about we pay you 20? Because I think we definitely feel you deserve it. And you're like, oh my God, this is pretty amazing. And like, also, what do I do? Oh, you should do the same thing that you do over there, or which is maybe you might be pen testing or something. Like, you're testing an environment. It's like, oh, it's just this particular website that we're trying to test and see how it goes. And like, sweet. All right. So you kind of start signing up, you leave your job, you start working for these people, well, quote unquote people, and you've never met them because nowadays it's all remote job anyways. So you kind of like the person on the other end, oh, I'd like to keep my camera off. I don't want to see the person. And like, still no red alerts, but you're like, and like you do the job, you come with a report, kind of pass the report, you get the £20,000. And next thing you know, you feel that basically the company shut down. Sorry, we'll just give you the whole money because technically we couldn't sustain. And they use that same information for how you hacked or found out the vulnerabilities to give it to the bad people, and that's how they get hacked. So that, but the takeaway from that for me was, I don't know if I verify companies that I apply jobs for. Like, unless it's like an Amazon or a Microsoft or, you know, like if it's a small company or it's a startup with a great idea, how do I know the startup is legit? Even if I know the person or see the person, if I get affected by this, who do I talk to? So that's what scares me personally. And the day he gave me the example, and you and I spoke about it for a while, I'm like, wow.
It's with all the advancement in technology. Obviously, we're on the offensive side, so we kind of always feel like, we're on the defensive side, so we always feel like we've got good technology, we're getting good at protecting, but our adversaries are getting equally good. They have the same technology, same speed. They have servers that are much cheaper. They have access to cloud. So they're ramping up as well, and they're becoming, as nation states and unicorns, and being able to do things much more quicker as well. So I think that is definitely something that's quite scary for the cybersecurity community.
Yeah, and I think you get crucified these days. I think if you look at any incidents reported, a lot of people are quick to crucify those companies and say, hey, your response wasn't good enough, your response wasn't quick enough. And it's easy to come out and say, but one day when it's your own company going through it, I wonder how many of these people would love to hear those responses from other people.
Definitely. Yeah, I remember putting together a bit of a deep dive on a couple of recent breaches, and it was only when said deep dive onto someone for a bit of a review to kind of see what they thought. They were just like, oh yeah, I used to work here. Oh gosh. What do you think then?
I can only imagine. Yeah, it's funny how cybersecurity kind of can go in both directions in terms of, even though all of us are supposed to be defenders, right? In a lot of ways, we're trying to defend companies, even pen testers. They're being paid money so they can highlight vulnerabilities or weaknesses so people can fix it and not get hacked or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a undercurrent of people who are just basically out there waiting, probably frustrations from their life, I guess, just taking out someone else. I think as some people like to call it, just put their garbage into someone else. Hopefully your day is also ruined.
And as you say, the way that we construct like a user object, we can apply that same sort of level of obscurity to a company object, as you say.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
A landing page, an email address. These things are very easy to acquire these
How
days.
often do you check when was the website created?
Oh, never.
Yeah,
all the time.
Yeah. I know, like, if someone's thinking of sending us a job, which is a fake job, I definitely check when the website was live first. Because you kind of have to wonder, a lot of people, and it sounds scary, but I think it's that the value of trust is not, I mean, we don't give enough value to trust these days. We would just, and it's not a bad thing. I think it's just that we used to see them happen. I guess if you go to Paris or wherever, you see these scam artists or people in Italy or wherever, you kind of see them and you kind of know, like, oh, this looks a bit sus, I'm going to walk away. But online, there is no way to do this. Like, no amount of padlocks with the green icon, that doesn't change anything. I can buy that for $2 and I still like, oh, well, I have a padlock. That's what everyone keeps telling you.
And the last few years have just amplified that, because with everything going online so quickly.
Exactly.
I think that's what we discovered when we did the digital transformation conversations, that people have moved at very fast speeds and probably not done it very well. And not because they didn't want to, just they didn't have the luxury to. People had to start working from home immediately. And that's a lot of debt that I think a lot of companies are carrying at the moment. It's like, how do we now go and fix all of that and find, what's missing? So that's going to be probably interesting for us in the coming
Yeah.
few years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we've onboarded stuff that we probably didn't do due diligence on because we just wanted to make sure our people could work safely from home, and now we have to make sure that it's all good.
I mean, in general, people are feeling this on their day-to-day job as well. Like, how often are we thinking, oh, I don't really want to go to a GP in person. I'll just order my food online. Why isn't Amazon delivering on the same day? Like, things like that. We've just gotten used to that as well. So same way, the digital space has kind of taken the same exact thing with offices kind of moving into the more digital space, more SaaS applications coming in. And one of the things we spoke about quite often in that digital transformation conversation was it's gone to a point where a lot of people had to make quick decisions because the business was going to possibly lose money if they didn't switch very quickly. A lot of people ended up going on Zoom or whatever. Not that Zoom was a bad thing, but it just that a lot of decisions were made to make just stuff happen because company doesn't lose money. But no one ever went back and revised it and said, well, is it really the right thing to do now? Is the employee still in London, or have they moved on to New Zealand or whatever and still working from New Zealand? Don't know, but I guess I have faith.
And faith and trust, obviously, are the
faith
same
and trust.
thing.
Yeah, that's right. Faith and trust in the person that I'm paying money for, that they're doing work from where I thought they were working from, without the virtual background of London raining, I guess.
And with the landscape changing so dramatically, like if we you brought up the interesting topic of metrics. I remember reading recently that one of the kind of key metrics to assess whether or not a company is doing particularly well in the security space is their level of spend, which is, of course,
It doesn't. Well, I guess I don't know. I'm curious what the research was, but I would be surprised if I've normally put them in two buckets.
Okay.
So the one company which has never really considered security before, I don't imagine there would be change there. The second bucket would be people who are now trying to apply for, say, or looking for customers which are in the enterprise space. They're suddenly like, oh crap, I need to find a virtual CISO. I need to figure out this compliance thing so I can get the customer to walk in. And the third bucket are people who never really cared about security, or maybe they did, but a breach happens and suddenly all the money is poured into security. Basically, the security person might just say, oh, I think there's antivirus missing. Next thing you know, you have the best antivirus you can buy money. And but all it took, but unfortunately, it took the breach for them to realize, actually, we should have just done it at the beginning. So that's the three buckets. And I normally would say, if based on, I haven't read the research report, but I imagine it's one of those three buckets where if you were to kind of categorize those companies, where you see the spend, like that's kind of, I'm sure there's a fourth bucket, which is have people who are really pro security. But the three common ones which you find majority are those three.
I think fear is driving a lot of it, because people are just like with Log4j and all the breaches. We've had a lot of sort of things actually happening and people scrambling. And I think now they're kind of like, oh yeah, we need to sort of make sure we're secure, because, and also we have got so much more workload now on cloud and other things that we need to make sure that we've got. Spending money is probably the easiest way. You want to make sure you're spending it in the right places. And yeah, I guess that. Again, we've got a massive cybersecurity skills gap as well. So I don't know if a lot of organizations actually know what they're spending their cybersecurity budgets on as well. So there's quite a few things happening.
Yeah.
Still pandemic. It's still there.
It's still there. It's still going on. I mean, we're talking about the security spaces like from, a mile high. You started cloud security. What drew you to the cloud security space in particular?
What took us to the cloud security space?
Yeah, over any of the other areas of security.
Right, yeah.
Technology.
I think the one belief we had, at least for me personally, I've been in the space for at least 2000, so it's been like 6-7 years,
okay.
But a bit longer as well. And I was fortunate enough to move into a startup I did check the website for. It wasn't a new website. Funny enough, it was a new website because it was technically a new startup. But I knew the people who were starting it, so that was kind of a bit more trust-building exercise. And only if I knew back then. Those folks were basically pioneering the whole space of, we should move into cloud.
Okay.
And they were basically, I drank the Kool-Aid and I'm like, oh yeah, and as you kind of dig your heels into it, and you realize after a point, every job that we know in IT is slowly transitioning into that space. Like I think traditionally what we've known as quote-unquote data centers, that's also changing to becoming more cloud now. Now, whether you look at cloud, which is what people usually say internal IT, or I guess what services that are products that are used by your staff, that's moving to cloud or that's moving to SaaS. The other half, which is your actual product that you sell to other customers and make money off, that's moving primarily to cloud because they are trying to compete with the other people, other competitors who are on cloud and trying to release more quickly and get to the market and all that. With automation, with more security, suddenly you're like, oh, I don't want to be left behind. So you leave your data center and you move your money-making products into cloud as well. So ultimately, and I won't say that the percentage of people that have moved into cloud is quite high. It's still like a lot of people in the cloud security space still say we are still scratching the surface because we haven't really democratized cloud security. Because if you were to truly democratize cloud security, it would be cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, when it started, the conversation was more about, oh, how do we do network security? How do we do security awareness? How do we do all this? But that was primarily focused on applications that were hosted in data centers. So all the conversations, all the lessons we've learned, all these years, that was all learned on a very different platform. So once the paradigm changes and most of these things move into cloud, suddenly all the content that you see around you, around whether it's security awareness, SOC, or whichever, I guess, field of cybersecurity you take, you would find it touches cloud. And it's basically that's one of the reasons why Amazon's biggest moneymaker is AWS. And it continues to grow there as well, because it's almost like undeniable. Like you're almost like, I know it's great, I know it's cheap, but I can have all these great features as well. But nah, that's not for me. I like the slow part.
I don't want to deploy things fast.
It's like, why would I do that? It just works. Like, I don't know why Ashish keeps talking about cloud all day.
I don't like change.
Yeah, I don't know why. I just want to go back home.
You were talking about a couple of different topics. This is obviously going to be cut because look, I've leaned out the frame. Sorry, future self who's going to be editing this. Apologies.
No to future Jess. Edit.
I was a little bit tight. I'm a little bit torn in which kind of direction to go in because I was wondering whether or not we've talked a little bit about trends, but I was kind of leaning maybe more towards the question of, do you need to know everything to be a leader in the space? And you've spoken to a lot of people. You've spoken to, you mentioned your digital transformation series earlier on. I mean, what's your position on being an expert in order to lead an organization?
Are you specifically talking about cybersecurity or any leadership?
If you are, say, you speak to a lot of CISOs. In order to be a chief information security officer, do you need to know everything? You're talking about how a lot of your most interesting guests almost doubt their own knowledge.
I think I probably would say this: the level of the easiest way to explain this is every CISO in a certain industry would know a lot more about their industry.
Okay.
So the way, at least the conversations that I've had with people, say a virtual CISO would know a lot more about compliance and governance and stuff, so they can apply it at different multiple industries.
Okay.
But say if you are a CISO in a energy sector, for lack of a better word, you would know a lot more about energy, how that space works, what's the security requirement, and then you would notice those people move around in other energy sector companies as well, because they know the space.
Got it. They've got the domain experience. They can stay. Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately, cybersecurity is a field where I think someone said this once, and I still believe it's true, is an inch deep and a mile wide.
Oh yes, that phrase.
You can pick an industry, but even within that industry, you kind of like, oh my God, it took me like 10 years to become an expert in this industry. Am I really going to leave this industry and go somewhere else? You see this quite often in banks as well. I think take the top 3 banks in any country, and you would find that and this is by the way, this is not even a cybersecurity thing. This is in general in IT as well. Mm-hmm. If you have been working in a bank for say 5, 6, maybe 10 years, you get used to it. You can understand. You know exactly what the process needs to be followed, how to get approval, how does the hierarchy work, what kind of budget is normal. You basically across the whole thing, and plus there's one governing body for banks. So you're like, well, no matter which bank that I go to, I can go for a higher salary, come back here again, and it's almost like really. I normally find people tend to just primarily focus on their industry.
Mm-hmm.
And like the next thing they would focus on is what's the scale of people that I manage.
Okay.
So the bigger the industry, so I'm managing 25 people or 30 people, or, I have a portfolio of a security budget, which is, 100 million. I don't know who has a 100 million security budget, but if they did, that would be amazing. I imagine it's like probably a couple of millions is probably the max someone would go.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to, and if it does go to say 10, 20, you're probably adding the cost of the salaries of people that you're managing as well. So when you have a conversation with CISOs, they normally kind of focus on, I'm in this space. So in everyone's back of their mind, they've already gone, okay, so this person is for this particular industry, so I can have more conversations around this space. Because sometimes, and to be fair, if I was to talk to this person from an energy sector, I may not relate to a lot of things that they use or face problems with. If you talk to universities, their probably biggest problem is security awareness.
Yeah.
Because they just want to educate the staff and professors that they have that, hey, you should do security right. But at the same time, if you come to a startup and a tech company like Facebook, or maybe not Facebook, like say Salesforce, for example, for them, it's all enterprise customers.
Yeah.
Security awareness is not the best thing. It's more like, how do we do more agile? What's security faster? Like, they're very, very different priority. So imagine a CISO in both those companies would be very different people because they're trying to tackle very different problems.
And potentially, I don't know whether or not this has come up in your conversations, you're potentially dealing with the same problem from a very different perspective,
That's
right?
it, yeah.
You're looking at it from a different sort of angle.
Yeah. So even security awareness, for that matter, is probably the best example. In a university context, you're trying to just explain to students that you cannot use torrent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but I use torrent. Well, you guys are not, like, you guys are like resistance or whatever. But at the same time, the same conversation about resistance or security awareness in an enterprise space would be more like, well, don't click on a link that you get in an email, right? Like, they're not talking about torrent at the point. They're talking about, hey, Jess, you might get an email, someone's pretending to be the CEO. Just make sure you don't click on the link and report it or whatever, right? So you're not talking to them about torrent downloads or this. So definitely, it's the same problem, very different way of looking at it.
Yeah, definitely. On that topic, I've got a couple of like final questions I just wanted to kind of put to you. You're talking about kind of. This is a question from my colleague who unfortunately can't be here, Steve. He wanted to ask you what the biggest shortfalls you think are in cloud security.
I think one of the ones which I think we are wanting to it's the lack of awareness. There's still, and I think that's what we found out when we started the podcast is that there just isn't enough information. And now, like, we're definitely starting to see a lot of people now creating content. There's lots of good podcasts coming. A lot of the cloud providers have started their own podcasts, and that's really good. But when we started back in 2019, there wasn't a lot of that. And we still feel there's still so much information that we can be sharing and educating. We don't have enough cloud security people to do the job. I think I don't remember the stats off the top of my head, but it's anticipated that there's going to be a massive skill gap in cybersecurity, but also in cloud security. So that's definitely a shortfall. I think the other thing that we did speak to a lot of leaders and different people in the industry was just in regards to, I think, diversity from all different aspects. I think because cybersecurity is a human problem. It's humans who attack different things. But we don't know whether we have a diverse enough group of people actually doing the protection side of things as well. So, and I think a lot of CISOs and leaders and professionals in the industry are really sort of, in sync with this, wanting to get a little more diversity. But there's still that gap. I don't think it is a diverse cohort of people doing cybersecurity from the defensive side.
I agree with all of those. I was going to add cloud service providers as well, like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, take any. They are not being held responsible enough for security.
Interesting. So
a lot of things, even though you would read in their stats, everything security is number one, blah, blah, blah. But while you're drinking the Kool-Aid, which sounds amazing, like, oh yeah, I'll trust this. But then you start seeing things like, oh, they had a vulnerability that they took 6 months to patch. Right, that kind of makes you go, okay. And again, go back to trust, what we were talking about earlier. That's at that point you're starting to question the trust because this is not your startup which just started yesterday. This is a company which is hosting probably, I don't know, however many millions of dollars of data on themselves, and they take 6 months to fix a vulnerability, and they don't let the researchers share what they found until they fixed it. But for the 6 months, basically, someone's misusing it, no idea. and I think this is kind of where I find there's a shortfall in the industry for it is at the moment slowly relying on the customer to make the right choice for security. Even though it should be a default, it is not a default for cloud service providers, and we are not holding them accountable for it. And fortunately, there are more conversations that are happening in the space where up till recently, no one could think of a database to have, hey, this is my collective database for vulnerabilities from Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud. I have a GitHub page. Some of the other guys have started like a website as well. So now people are coming around to the point that, oh, we need to hold them accountable. Like I need to ask for a pen test report, clearly, because I can't trust them enough. I think they are pen testing. I've never, because every time I would ask for a pen test report before, they're like, well, so many people trust us. Why would you want a pen test report?
Something very interesting I was reading recently. Someone said like shared responsibility means no one takes responsibility.
Ooh.
That's pretty
Because
much
it's
it.
like, what are we sharing? Like, where do you...
The rapper boy, yeah, that's pretty much it.
So yeah, so I think that's definitely, because I think it's good. Again, it's like zero trust. It's good in theory and it's a nice sounding word, but what does it actually mean, and who's taking responsibility for what? Like, yes, it's shared, but where do we draw the line, and are there elements that no one's taking responsibility for?
Exactly. I feel like that kind of links back to a conversation that we kind of had, I guess, to break the fourth wall, like off air briefly, around designing for the case that you actually have as opposed to for the one that you want to be true.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true.
Well, do you think that's where the pressure needs to come from? Do you think it needs to come from outside the businesses? Do you think it needs to come from from users?
I think it definitely needs to come from users. I think enough people need to start asking the question, but it kind of comes back to what Shilpi was saying. There's not enough awareness and not enough. It hasn't become so. When you talk to people, I teach at SANS as well, and we still get people who are trying to get into cloud in 2022, first time, and these are massive companies, right?
Yeah.
And nothing against them, so I'm championing them. Yes, great, you're going in, but you kind of have to wonder that there are so many other companies that kind of like them are also trying to get into cloud in 2022. So we are still, as I said in the beginning, we're still scratching the surface. It looks like because we're in this world of, hey, cloud security, cloud, there's a massive reinforce, there's a massive reinvent convent. You're like, oh my God, 20,000, 30,000 people coming. It's like, oh, it's equivalent of a Salesforce event and everything. Yeah. And it's easy to kind of forget that, well, it's only a few of us who have gone into this. Not everyone is in this space, and I totally feel for them, because in a lot of ways we have kind of done some of the work for them to kind of be aware of what they should not do. But at the same time, there's not enough help for them to get into the space as well, because they feel, well, it's not really interesting. I've done this like plenty of times. So they have a skill shortage, because most people who have been in the cloud space for say 3-4 years, in a lot of ways they're veterans, because they've done a lot in that very short span of time. And they don't want to go back to what they were doing before.
Yeah.
But no one's teaching the existing people as well. So how do you kind of, like, it's a chicken and egg situation where the people who were good have moved on, but the people who are trying to get into the space now are left with no one who can help them. So that's another shortfall.
No, that's an excellent one. I think that kind of echoes a lot of the kind of the points I found the most compelling about your session on that you gave like at one stage around building security champions.
Yeah. Security advocates. Basically, I mean, that's why we started the whole cloud security meetup as well. The intent was to find other cloud security advocates out there who basically, like us, didn't have a title for cloud security, but have been talking about cloud security. And I feel that hopefully the initiative that we have with Cloud Security Meetup, which is a global meetup, we just had one in London, doing in Boston, hopefully Zurich, Seattle. I'm going to not keep going, because like almost like a fire hose going of at least the emails that came through, which I've been really grateful for.
People are hungry, and I think that's what we realized even when we put it out there, that so many people are like, when are you doing it in our cities? When are you coming? Because people want to know, like, everything's moving to the cloud and it needs to be secured. And people want to have those conversations that they're unsure about. And it's, as Ashish said, it's, it's a wide topic. We found that, initially when we started the podcast, like after the first year, I remember us going, are we going to have much to talk about in season 2? Like, haven't we covered all the topics? But every year, there's just so much more to still talk about. Like there's more cloud providers are coming out, or every cloud provider is coming out with new services. There's Kubernetes, or there'll be containers. Now there's serverless. So there's so much, and it's really hard to keep up. And even from a news perspective, we started Cloud Security News because a lot of people were like, it's almost impossible to keep up with what's coming out because it's just so dynamic. So this is kind of like our little initiative to just do a little bit to sort of engage the global community in terms of keeping up with what's happening in this space.
Brilliant.
Another shortfall, I would say, which I'm happy for Steve when someone to create content in, because I clearly cannot find enough time for it, is when you find content for, say, cloud security, they only talk about services that are really common. Like, for example, if you use a server to host an application, in case of AWS, it's AWS EC2. That's what they call their virtual service. And there's a lot of information about how to do EC2 really well.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, you came up with the idea that I want to start a 5G network on AWS, which you can. Apparently, there's a service for it. So there is nothing for that from security. So because, well, if you think about it, all of us use phones. They're all on some kind of network, most likely on 5G as well. So if I want to create something like that, clearly it affects a lot of people, and maybe it could be beneficial for the whole world, because whatever the service you're using is, you might make a cheaper version because you're on AWS or Azure or whatever, but no one is looking at security for that.
Gosh.
So, but no one even is looking at how do you even implement it. And there are over 300 plus services just in Amazon.
And there's going to be more by next week.
That's right. Next week, it reinvent as well. So probably a few more after that. But that's the thing. That's the game. So to Shilpi's point, it was funny. The first season when it finished, we were talking about, I don't know if we will have enough.
I think we thought we've covered it.
Yeah,
we've covered cloud
we actually had a conversation. I think we've done all the episodes that are possible. But
3 years on, and I think now we're at a point where we realize, oh my god, like we've got so much more we want to talk about. There's not enough episodes to.
Hopefully, we get to go. So our aim is to hopefully soon go full time as well. Hopefully, soon. Yeah, very, 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 very close. So if that happens officially, hopefully people will find out soon as well. But I think we're as soon as you try to sign it, that's pretty much it. That's what we're waiting for.
Exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Well, I was going to say I mean, that sounds like it's not far. So probably by the time it's live, that might be the case.
Yes.
Where can people find you? You've already given us lots of resources. Is there any sort of, we've obviously got your meetup that's spinning out globally.
So Cloud Security Meetup, Cloud Security News, Cloud Security Podcast. I think we have started a Cloud Security Academy as well, but I think we're still trying, because now we can go full time. We can kind of start pumping out into that as well. Hopefully fill that chicken and eggs problem as well. But when we get to that, Cloud Security Podcast, cloudsecuritypodcast.tv is the official website. And that's where you can link back to Cloud Security Meetup and Cloud Security.
And I think if you put Cloud Security Podcast anywhere, we should pop up on some social media.
If we don't pop up, then we're not doing our job. So definitely let us know.
I think we picked the name well.
Yes.
We went for simplicity, but I think it's worked out.
Yes.
Oh, it ranks very. I was going to say those 3 words together. It's just ocean of content. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the questions as well. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.